the last one is, I believe, it marginalises First Nation standards in historically based practice, because actual fact, standards are good. I'm not talking about standards in terms of if a standard is appropriate, culturally specific, not appropriate, effective practice, then standards are good, if those are the outcomes, if that allows for those things. Okay, but they have to be ours, which is based on tika, which means to do what is right, and our tikanga, that is our philosophies and approaches to dealing with social issues, right? The rules of living together. Okay, but we set them, not Crime Prevention Unit in Wellington, not some Eurocentric body at AUT where I'm going. Not importing, going to Australia or any other country or Canada and having a look at the standardisation process and the accreditation process and bringing it in, and then adding a bit of Maori on the end of it. Because generally they come to us very late, and they don't always go to those who are heavily not critical, but we'll run a critical eye over it. Okay, they have to be ours, because in actual fact we don't want, even in our processes, we won't allow for poor practice. There's concerns, for example, there's a lot of talk, subversive talk, and under the radar at the moment, where we're actually going to start developing our own accreditation. Maybe I shouldn't say this in front of certain New Zealanders, but we are basically talking to our wānanga, which are the Māori universities, and we're going to design next year, we're going to start developing our own accreditation and our own practices to train our own people. Not for formal processes either, but so that within our whānau, within our families and within our communities, we can have people that are trained in our ways, that we also have vetted, because probably like in other First Nations, we have very much a lot of powers given to our elders, and I hate to say it, but some of our elders you wouldn't want to be leading some of these processes, particularly the wife abusers and the child abusers and what have you. But we're going to start developing our own to empower us. So I've sort of covered some of the stuff around the process of standardisation, bringing them all together. This really is about, well, that's why I talked about standardisation, and it's almost like the new criminal justice imperialism in some ways. At the moment, what's happening with this international restorative justice industry and a lot of its activities, it's imposing international standards, which means Eurocentric standards on us. In Canada, in the last few years, FGCs, I think they've even been legitimised through your legislation as their process to utilise. Well, I don't understand why you would do that when your First Nations have their own. You don't need ours, and I don't want you to utilise it either, because it's actually quite frankly insulting for me and for my people. Because we have been disempowered enough by the destruction of our practices, and now the so-called, because you've got a few blooming Māori terms or approaches that are utilised within FGCs, that's been used as the excuse to impose it on First Nations here. That appropriation, okay, FGCs sold here as a Māori-based process, suitable for other First Nations, is just simply imperialism and neo-colonialism, quite frankly. It's insulting, yeah.
So I'm thinking about the application of restorative justice principles and process in non-Aboriginal contexts, like let's say here in Canada, not working with First Nations groups here, but working in other parts of society. And I'll speak for myself. I certainly have no interest in stealing, but I do have an interest in learning. And it strikes me that the way that we've been practicing justice in quote unquote mainstream Canadian society, well, it's not serving us, and I'm afraid that it's leading to disaster in a lot of people's lives.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's an urgency to learn, and so I'm kind of looking for your advice in that, in approaching frankly the wisdom that comes from traditions such as yours, and there's many others.
Yep.
That's where I think many of us look to for guidance.
Yeah.
And how to do that with respect.
Well, it's doing with the difference will be if you're going to do it, and I can only speak for me and for my people, not for the First Nations here. But we would expect people to come along and ask us how we do things and how it's done correctly. Rather than at the moment what they do is they read a few books, generally not written by us, and then just simply appropriate it. So, but we wouldn't force our processes on anyone else. Let's be honest. In the urban modernised context that even we live in, there will be cross-pollinisation within our practices. There'll be certain features of our old ways, like the formal banishment of people and killing for certain, because our what we consider to be crime and the most serious social harm are very, very different from the European context now. We use punishments that would, to some Europeans would seem extremely harsh for minor, where you broke tikanga, where you impacted severely on someone's mana or their prestige or whatever. Whereas other things we tended to take a less punitive approach. We did have punitive elements, it wasn't all love and roses in terms of our approach, let's be frank about it. But we acknowledged in the modern context that we couldn't go back to some of our practices. On that point, I actually heard, I had a Māori student ring me a couple of weeks ago who was really upset, who was doing a criminology course at Wellington, and there was a Professor John Pratt there who I used to work with. He's a British criminologist who gave the Māori lecture to these first year students, who criticised Moana Jackson and others who said we must develop a parallel system based on our principles, and said why would Maoris want to go back to that where we used to tomahawk each other all the time? Well, no one's saying that, but we do want to lay in place again some of our ways. I'm finding it hard to give you any advice around what you're asking. You have to ask your people here, mate. But if it was me, then come and ask and work. But it may be the question, may be no,
Why don't you cool if I make a comment and then ask a question? Is that good?
Yeah, you can go for it.
Cool. Just briefly, my name's Tim Clark and I'm the chairperson of Restorative Justice Aotearoa in New Zealand, which is the provider group membership organisation.
Can I have water?
And I thought it might be helpful just to say a couple of things. One is that we have 32 provider groups in New Zealand. There's soon to be 26, and 8 of those define themselves as being Maori groups as opposed to being Pākehā providers.
Cheers.
And that at the moment we're working really hard on a standards process that incorporates both tikanga and the requirements for the other standards. But I wanted to acknowledge what Juan was saying about the tension that exists for us as restorative justice providers, needing to somehow kind of fit with the state requirements, but not allowing that to compromise the process and the quality of what we do. Hop to one side for just a minute, and I agree with you completely about the FGC process, that it's run from within the state. The agenda from within those meetings is about compliance of the young people with state audit initiatives, and most of the people that come to the room in a family group conference are there as tools of the state, I guess, to kind of sheet that message home, and there's very little restorative that happens in those meetings. So, and welcoming what you're saying about the the use of the wānanga and being able to develop another training process instead of accreditation, etc. Fantastic. Question for me is, how do we better engage with the broader Māori community in order to get that happening on a more national front, because it's a fight that we have to fight, I think, in terms of the standardisation of the process to the extent that it ends up looking like the rest of the criminal justice process and therefore not working because it's so boxed.
Yeah, I acknowledge the work that your umbrella organisation has done. I understand how and what I've said is not a direct credit. My criticism, there's many criticisms really, has been of the way in which the policy industry has carried out this process. And I know how difficult it has been for you guys, both the mainstream and the Māori, because I've talked mainly to the Māori, Mike and all those guys, and ringing them up all the time going, and believe what MOJ's done. I think, I don't think it's going to be that hard. Once we go through the wānanga process, at the moment we're doing it very much under the radar until early in the year when Robert Webb and myself and Moana Jackson are going to start actually piecing it together. We've already got agreement from a couple of the wānanga Aotearoa and Ngati Porou as well. The state, CPE doesn't exist anymore. It's been collapsed within the Ministry of Justice. Once they get wind of this, we weren't going to make it a fait accompli. They're going to have to come and engage with us on our terms. And then maybe we could partner up, because it might be the time that when we do that, when they realise they're losing the control they're losing the power to force upon us their processes, it'll open the space for the mainstream. Because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want our processes to be appropriate for whatever community that we're dealing with. So that's all I can say, really. So in other words, you know, well, come and have a chat with you when I come up to Auckland in July. How's that? Yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, just a comment. I mean, I think that, to me the term Eurocentric is as bad as the Orientalist concept. We have in our European tradition go way back, circle processes and consensus building processes and things. We have it in our own roots, and that's where we should be looking for the processes that we're building for our more European side. And I don't think we're doing that very well. That's the wider comment.
Oh,
We do have it.
yeah. Sorry. When I use the word Eurocentric,
We've had a dynamic
yeah.
contrast between since the beginning of this evolution of this structured justice system has had to squash a lot of the alternatives in our own background in order to get that hegemony, and we've just got to go back to our own roots and pull up again those things that were destroyed through the process. And I think we need to do the same thing that the Maori need to do, or the government need to do, or anybody else. And we shouldn't be stealing it or thinking. I think the term marketing is an extremely good one, and I think that's what's been happening.
Yeah, I'll be provocative, but yeah.
What your comments are.
I mean, if you talk, I use the word Eurocentric only in terms of the tendency of our policy industry to continuously look to other European contexts, to the United Americans, to the Canadian states and their formulation of these policies to bring them over, as opposed to an indigenous focus. And by indigenous, I mean not just Māori, but even within our Pacifica communities and our migrant communities in they don't even look at them. Like for example, one of the reasons we found out recently that there's actually some real significant issues going on within some of our migrant communities like Burmese and what have you. And then I was talking to a couple of cops in police in Wellington recently who said, but we don't know nothing about it because they have simply developed their own processes for dealing with some of these issues themselves, and they see it as like hiding it away. No, they've looked at the process that we have in the courts and that and went, no way, it's not going to work. So anyway. I want to show you two things. This slide, I just realised out of order. This quote, when I talked to before about all those things, appropriation, indigenisation and the disempowerment, and this really speaks to the problem of standardisation and accreditisation. Accreditation, this is from the famous Māori criminologist, John Braithwaite. Accreditation for mediators that raises the spectre of a Western accreditation agency telling an Aboriginal elder that a century-old restorative practice does not comply with the accreditation standards is a profound worry. This quote and what it means is why I am so critical of the standardisation process. And just lastly, I just thought I made these up last night, some questions to ponder. I was thinking about this last night when I was having a glass of wine with my mate Barry. How can a process based on appropriation, co-option and racist imperialist assumptions about First Nations and their response to social harm be restorative? It's not, it's imperialism. You've disempowered another people. Not even directly, you don't have to do it directly, you just steal our bloody well philosophies and our cultural ideals and values, and you're disempowering us. And you're doing no service to your own community either, who probably have their own ways. Why not look in your own backyard and pull from within your own communities and empower your communities? Don't go looking to us. Our way is appropriate for us. In fact, sometimes it doesn't even work for us, so we've got to go through and learn. But, you've got your own ways of doing things, surely. You don't need a market, this really sexy marketed product from New Zealand to do good. Why don't people trust their First Nations? I come over here, I've only been here twice now, but I don't know, I just get a sense that there's a distrust. In New Zealand, there's a distrust of us and our ways. They're alien and they don't seem to work. But we don't want to go and give you the money to be able to show that it works. But, they just don't seem to trust us. They don't seem to trust that we actually can deal with our own problems in a way that is actually pro-social and constructive. And this last one is about FGCs. What is restorative about a process that will only deal with guilt and the guilty and does nothing to transform whānau communities' harmful practices and policies? I forgot I had that one. corporatising our knowledge and practices to package a justice product destroys inherent communitarian, transformative values and power of First Nation responses to social harm. And that's it. Thank you. All.